Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, bringing you our daily dose of news and views, covering the topics we hope are relevant to you. Well, today we look at the UK Labour government's failing support for the Sikh community. And indeed, we start joining some dots between India, Bangladesh and the UK, which may explain a lot. More initiatives to combat anti-Sikh hate crime. We take a look at how the UN currently views the Kashmir situation. And Christian leaders are finally calling out India over its persecution of religious minorities. Well, joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our viewers. Thanks for continuing to post your comments. We love reading them, so keep doing it, and we'll keep bringing some up at the end of the show on and talk about them on air. Thanks, everyone.
Indeed, and of course James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And as James mentions, we will of course towards the end of the show take a look at lots of your great comments and provide our perspectives on those, so do keep those coming in. But let's get on with the show. James, what have you got to start us off with today?
Well, Christian leaders throughout the US have finally spoken up and actually addressed the issue of not only Christian minorities in India and the human rights abuses, but also the other minorities throughout India. So they are addressing it as a whole and in part for their group. So it's been a long time since we've seen the church getting involved in publicly speaking on world issues such as this. So it's really good to see them finally standing up and recognizing that more needs to be done. Without the support of organizations around the world, of course, less people know about it. So now that they are speaking out, there's going to be a whole new audience of people watching what's going on in India and watching the Modi government. Now, as you can see, this article here was released by the Catholic News Agency, and this was brought out a couple of days ago, and they have basically brought up that the BJP party and Prime Minister Modi's government has been failing miserably when it comes to protecting the rights of minorities and others, not only in the Kashmir region, but all throughout India. And of course, we know that there have been increases in certain regions of the country, but it's ongoing everywhere. One of the numbers I wanted to point out here is that the violence against Indian Christians has skyrocketed since the 2014 ascent of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Hindu Nationalist Party. Now, they have said in their letter that it documented 1,570 attacks on Christians in 2023, up from its previous number in 2022 of 1,198. So that is a substantial jump in violent acts against Christian minorities, but also in attacks on other minorities as well. So it's not isolated just to the Christians. They have finally said that the U.S. church is so they've called out the U.S. church for being silent on this issue. And again, now they are responding and starting to recognize that India is not only a great ally, but also the most dangerous democracy in the world for human rights and abuses. So it's a very interesting article that I encourage you to read. And the last part of it that I'm going to bring up is that the United States Department of State represents or categorizes a country of particular concern, or a CPC, as one that is engaged in or tolerated particularly severe violations of religious freedoms. And that is what the Christian church is calling on the government to do, and that is to put them on the list, put India on the list of countries of particular concern, as this list has been out for years and gets updated frequently, and yet somehow India has remained off of the list. Now, we know that there's a lot of involvement when it comes to different countries trying to negotiate trade agreements and other beneficial contracts and trade authorizations with India and India with others, including Russia, China, Canada, the US, the UK, and I can go on for quite a while. But this is definitely big news in the fact that they're recognizing that more needs to be done. The governments around the world must take action and put India on this list. There's no way around it. And when it comes to that, we also have a special report coming up, and that looks at India and the international trade, how that is impacting the lack of calling out of Modi and his government by other foreign leaders when it comes to trying to negotiate trade agreements over demanding human rights respect and following of United Nations law. So with that, Angus, I mean, this is something that we have been following for quite some time and reporting on, and it's really been way overdue for the church and other organizations around the globe to speak out on this issue.
Yeah, it's a very interesting article, this, because it does highlight, well, I think several issues that we highlight on a regular basis, but once again it is yet another group or organisation, a collective of people who have come together and demanded governments stand up and call out this outrageous oppression of human rights in India and call it out. It's interesting it's come from leaders in the Christian church in the US, because also here in the UK we've heard a lot of the Church of England, the Christian Protestant Church of England. I don't think this is from the Catholic side, but essentially from the Christian faith. Here in the UK, the Church of England has received an awful lot of criticism. It's had hugely falling off congregations. It's losing membership by the generation, actually. The younger generation are just not feeling attached to the Church of England because it's lost its way in many ways. It's become too old-fashioned, and a lot of the young are very passionate about many world affairs and about particularly human rights and things like this. They're very motivated. Not necessarily always in the right direction, but at least they do have that passion of youth, which is when it's channeled in the right direction, is an extremely powerful force. And the Church of England has fallen foul of this because the Church of England has dabbled in politics, particularly with our own recent. Our own Archbishop of Canterbury, our most senior member, has dabbled in politics, and he's upset an awful lot of people by not always getting it right. In fact, quite often getting it completely wrong, and has thus alienated much of his potential audience. And actually, there is a rise, and I'm going off on a slight tangent here, but there is a rise of breakaway churches, should we say, still in the Christian faith, but they're a lot more modernised, they're a lot more relevant to society today. But it's interesting that there are parallels here in the US as well. In this article, these people have called out the US church as well, saying, why aren't you standing up? Why aren't you being more robust about these issues? Because they are so blatant. And it even says in the same article, James, I mean, a great quote, that India is the most dangerous democracy. Now, I'd actually pull them up on that term. How can you call yourself a democracy if indeed you call it a dangerous democracy? There is no such thing. It's either a democracy or it is not. If it's a dangerous democracy, that is what we call a paradox. It is not. China, in many ways, is democracy, as is Russia is a democracy in the sense that they still cast votes. Well, right. That actually doesn't make a democracy. It just so happens that people vote. But they are totalitarian states, and that is the way that India is fast moving towards as well. So, but of course, that old monster of trade agreements versus human rights comes up once again. And it just highlights yet again that there is this two-tier break in society where we have, in the lower tier, we have normal human society, organisations, rights groups, Amnesty International being a typical example of this, and of course many members of these churches calling out the breach of human rights that is occurring on a daily basis in India, and yet leaderships, governments, establishments are not calling it out because all they are interested in is dollars. It appears across the world that world leaders are not calling out these human rights abuses in India because all they see is a market of 1.4 billion people. They see a massive dollar sign in front of their eyes. They think, oh, our national interest actually is a trade deal with this massive market, because just think of the wealth it can generate for our own market. So once again, it's the dollar sign trumping the human rights record, which is tragic, but we will continue to push. And these governments will only change their tune when the call for action becomes loud enough that they cannot ignore it. And it's also right. Interesting that they do call out in the same article, they identify the perpetrators absolutely spot on. They call it Hindu nationalist, the Hindu nationalists behind all this. Of course it is. It's the RSS in the form of the BJP who are oppressing. And of course we have reported ourselves on the burning of churches in Manipur, amongst many other places, but Manipur. when that dreadful violence has erupted, and the Kuki tribes have suffered, the Christians have suffered, and churches have been burnt to the ground in their hundreds, and in fact I think it was over 1,500 across India in recent years. So yeah, James, all I can say is, well, at last the Christian churches, or parts of the Christian church, are standing up. But we need governments to stand up. Why are governments not taking notice of these cries from all these different parts of Western society? Why are you not calling India out? Why are you shaking their hands?
And I think that it's a good time years ago would have been a better time. But I'm just saying that with the influence of the church in the current election, in current changes in policy, as well as current, debate throughout the U.S., I think that this will get a lot of attention and hopefully just open people's eyes to what's going on over there. So we can hope anyway that this is a start to something different, and we'll just have to wait and see. As I said, we do have a special report on trade and human rights of India, so hopefully we'll be able to get that. I believe there might be a technical issue with some of our special reports being put out, but hopefully we'll see the series of them. We have several coming out very soon, so watch for those. Let's move on to the United Nations now. Speaking of human rights and abuses, the United Nations is stating that their stance on Kashmir has not changed. And essentially, they are looking to influence the current situation, the violence. They are recognizing the human rights atrocities and the lives being lost there, the violence that's coming from all sides, and just really calling out India for the lack of dealing with this, and, since they've taken control. So let's take a look at this article here that I found very interesting. And as you can see, the United Nations is looking to make change and or influence change, I should say. They can't make change, but they can definitely influence it. So let's go through the article. I won't read it all, but I will read a bit of it. And it states that the United Nations has said that its position on Jammu and Kashmir remains unchanged, saying that the final settlement of the dispute concerning Jammu and Kashmir is to be reached by peaceful means in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations and full respect for human rights. So very clear, they're not mixing words, they're calling it out as it is. The position on Kashmir remains unchanged. The deputy spokesman went on to state that they are very aware of the deteriorating human rights situation in Kashmir as they are being questioned on it more and more. And they also recognize the suffering of the people following India's annexation of occupied Kashmir in 2019. So while speaking at a media briefing yesterday, the spokesman asserted that the United Nations position on the region is governed by the Charter of the United Nations and applicable Security Council resolutions, and that is something that India wants more involvement in, and that is the Security Council and getting seats there. So we'll have to watch and see what happens. He also recalls the 1972 agreement on bilateral relations between India and Pakistan, also known as the Simla Agreement. And Pakistan marked the 5th anniversary of the day when Hindu nationalist government of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, go figure, his name pops up in all of these issues, but he claims not to be aware or at least not taking action on them. So that which allowed it in a separate constitution inherited protections on land jobs under Article 370 and 35A of the Indian Constitution. So again, as Angus and I have spoken about many a times, how India has retracted this ability for them to control and handle their own issues in these regards, and then taken it a step further and really shut them out of government positions and high-paying jobs with some type of job security, and also state licensed and registered corporations. This, of course, has impacted the financial stability of the region and the individuals there. A lot of people have gone from a bit of comfort, I can't say, living comfortable lives, but a bit of comfort, right down into abject poverty, which is just disgusting when you combine that on top of the violence and desperation, the ongoing clashes between the different indigenous and religious cultures. It's just a powder keg waiting to explode. And believe me, it is already popping off in different directions. And we're just waiting for either somebody to get in there and start helping to calm it, or for, as I said, it just to explode in a massive tragedy. And that's what's happening now, is that it's a slow tragedy, but it's going to get much worse before it gets better if there's no intervention by Modi and his government. And I would like to see the United Nations and the Security Council and other international organizations take it a step further to start looking at different sanctions and consequences for India's failure to recognize human rights abuses, and to recognize that they need to deal with the issue of places such as Manipur, Kashmir, Jammu, and so forth. It's just been going on too long, too many lives lost on all sides, and it just has to stop. Angus, we've talked about it time and time again.
Yes, and we have talked about the UN as well before. Is the UN a toothless tiger? That is a big question, and I think we've said before that the UN it's a body that is required. Its sanction is required. Its validation is required if any country wants to take any international action. Of course, we saw that in the Iraq War and other major interventions across the world, usually by the US and the West, I have to say. But the UN itself, does it hold any power? As a body, I think its only power is as a vehicle, as a method, as a tick box, as we've said before, to allow other nations to take affirmative action or positive action about some issue. So the question then about India, what can the UN do about India? I think the UN itself can't do anything about India, and I don't think the UN will ever do anything about India. The only thing that could be done about India has to come from another nation or another group of nations in an alliance. And as we've alluded to on many occasions, that can really only come from the US, and probably with Canada, Canada and the UK and Australia in tow, the Five Eyes nations. But as always, it always comes up against will. Will the West have that desire, that motivation to take on India? We talk about sanctions, James. I mean, who's going to sanction India? Who's going to sanction the nation of 1.4 billion people that we've just talked about? This nation with this massive commercial market that every country on the planet wants to do business with. It's just not going to happen. Money talks, as always. So unfortunately, I think it's great to see the UN calling these things out. And it's fabulous, actually, that in this very same report is that we talk about the methods of the BJP and the RSS, of how they've stripped J&K of its constitutional reserve status, and the methodology that they've used. The methodology is straight out of China's playbook, like China has done with Tibet. They've deliberately poured people, they've changed the rules so that they can dilute the population, the demographics of J&K. They can allow people from outside of J&K to move in now to J&K. And what does that do? Of course, it dilutes the indigenous voice. It means that the indigenous people of the state their voice becomes less and less. It becomes weaker and weaker. And that's basically how they are taking control of J&K. And at the same time, they're stamping out the ability for anybody to complain about it. They're closing down any news outlets, they're closing down journalists, intimidating any journalist who dares raise their head to say this is not right. As you said, James, in this article, what is going to happen about it? I don't think the UN is highlighting it, and Pakistan's highlighting it. Many human rights people, organisations are highlighting it. But things will only ever change when governments, and powerful governments, call India out and take action about it. But at the moment, I see no sign. I only see governments going the other way, saying they're rubbing their hands with commercial glee and looking at the dollar signs of 1.4 billion people, James.
Yeah, and that's what it comes down to, Angus. It's the old saying that, the money talks, right? And
exactly that. It is. It is. Money talks and money walks, unfortunately, and which actually brings me on to my first story. very relevant. And our new Labour government, and we've already called out our new Labour government on several occasions for their failing support of the Sikh community, certainly the British Sikh community, and they're failing to call out India for its dreadful human rights records, and particularly for one specific issue, Jagtar Singh Johal, the gentleman, the British citizen who has been arbitrarily and illegally effectively detained in India on some trumped-up charges and remains in prison for nearly 7 years without any trial as such. So, what has been happening in the UK? Well, yet again, another failure of the Labour government to acknowledge what's going on here. And I'm going to point to you to a parliamentary discussion, a parliamentary debate that happened only a few days ago here in the UK Parliament, the House of Commons. And we talked recently about David Lammy, the Labour Foreign Secretary, who went to India to meet his counterparts in India to discuss all sorts of issues. And it was claimed he would raise these elements of human rights. And of course, he was pressured to talk about Jagtar Singh Johal and any other illegally or arbitrarily detained prisoners. And if you recall from one of our earlier shows, James Landale, beg your pardon, of the BBC, asked David Lammy before his visit to India, are you going to call out Narendra Modi for arbitrarily detaining Jagtar Singh Johal? And David Lammy refused to answer that question. He refused to acknowledge that Jaggi was arbitrarily detained. And that's an important phrase because it means essentially he's been detained against any formal rule of law or any democratic process of law. And he refused, David Lammy absolutely refused on camera to acknowledge he was arbitrarily detained, despite having already in the past admitted he was arbitrarily detained, as indeed so did our current Prime Minister Keir Starmer. So, in the House of Commons only a few days ago, upon Mr Lammy's return, he was questioned by MPs. And the following occurred, and this is quite telling. Gregor Poynton, who again is a Labour, that's the government, a Labour MP, asked David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, he asked how his recent discussions went with his Indian counterparts. And David Lammy responded by saying, I met my Indian counterpart, Dr. Jaishankar, in Delhi. We discussed how to unlock the potential of the UK-India relationship for economic growth and to develop a stronger, deeper partnership to reinvigorate that relationship. I'm very pleased to launch the Tech and Security Initiative, which brings together businesses across our two countries working in those areas. Now, I noticed lots and lots about business, nothing about human rights. Now, I'll also point to our audience that Gregor Poynton's constituency is almost adjoining that constituency of Jagtar Singh Johal. I also noticed no question from the MP for, the Labour MP for Jaggi's constituency either. So even his own MP didn't raise any questions about, did you talk to your counterpart about Jaggi? So Gregor Poynton then responded, I thank you, my right honourable friend, for his response. I recently met a number of members of the growing Indian population in my constituency. They were very clear with me that if we get our India-UK relations right, it will be of huge benefit to both countries. Does the Foreign Secretary agree that the signing of the Technology and Security Initiative within just a month of coming into office shows that we are working internationally to drive our economy and secure our country? Again, no mention of Mr Jagtar Singh Johal. And Mr Lammy replies, my honourable friend will be pleased to hear that the Trade Secretary announced the government's intention to continue trade talks with India just yesterday. And I'm sure there's more we can do to reduce barriers between our two countries. So, fantastic. Our Labour government, talking amongst themselves, and not one of them, not one single member of our government even mentions Jagtar Singh Johal. They're all rubbing their hands and patting each other's backs about the potential trade deal. Now, the Conservative government, who we have criticised and eviscerated on regular occasions for their abject failure over Jagtar Singh Johal, as it turns out, finally in opposition. One member of that government, in fact, Lammy's counterpart, Alicia Kearns, who is the MP for Rutland and Stamford. I'll play you the video of this exchange.
The Foreign Secretary rightly visited India to discuss a trade agreement between our countries. His party regularly called for human rights to be part of that UK-India trade deal. So can he update the House on whether he secured said agreement during his visit? Now, on human rights, we on these benches welcome the Foreign Secretary raising with his counterparts the case of Jaggi Singh Johal, a British national who the UN has determined to be arbitrarily detained, and there were reports that he was subject to torture. Can the Right Honourable Gentleman confirm today before the House that he still believes, as he did a month ago, that Jaggi is being arbitrarily detained? And will he today publicly call for Jaggi's release, just as he urged from this dispatch box repeatedly, the last Foreign Secretary? Will he meet with Jaggi's family as Lord Cameron did? And finally, having adopted the Foreign Affairs Committee's recommendation of a special envoy for Britain's wrongly detained abroad, when will he be announcing that somebody has been appointed?
What can I say to the Right Honourable Lady who has raised these issues over many years, that this is a very serious case, and I remain absolutely committed to pushing for a faster progress and to resolve it. I did, of course, raise the issue with the Minister for External Affairs in India last week. We continue to raise our concerns, particularly about allegations of torture and the right to a fair trial, and of course I will meet with the family over the coming weeks.
Tom Gordon.
Oh, well done. But that's it. I mean, my first comment there is, finally, the Conservative government of 14 years did absolutely nothing about Jaggi Singh Johal. And finally, in opposition, somebody actually manages to raise the issue, trying to call David Lammy to account. So where was your voice over the last 14 years? But anyway, at least now you've finally discovered your conscience. And David Lammy, well, what does that answer mean? Well, we're talking about it. You know, in a 20-second response, well, we're talking about it. Yeah, but where everything else, all the focus is on a commercial trade deal. So it's all bluff and bluster. And again, notice he refused to acknowledge the term arbitrarily detained. He didn't refer to torture. At least he mentioned torture. Yeah. And he said, oh, we did raise it with our counterparts. Yeah, but what are you doing about it? You're still having trade talks. So once again, it's we'll talk the talk, but we won't walk the walk. It's all words. It's all absolute political rhetoric, as it always is, and no action. So there you go, James. I'm afraid my my attitude towards our current government is falling fast. I think they are failing like every government before them.
Yeah. Well, and I think it was important that they actually brought it up finally. I know that in a lot of these delicate situations of trying to get prisoners released, they don't like to talk about them in public. They don't like to air the dirty laundry, so to speak. But I think that this has gone on so long that it needs to be addressed. The public needs to know that the government is getting off their ass to do something. And the other thing I found interesting in that article is they're touching on improved security initiatives between the UK and India. I mean, what exactly does that mean in this day and age where we're seeing more countries adding or bringing India up higher on the list of threats when it comes to international interference and such? So, you know, I thought that was interesting as well. How can you look at, bringing India more involved in the tech of a country and the security when you can't trust that they're not killing your citizens?
Exactly. That's a very good point, James, because, of course, we're talking about trying to align India to from a strategic perspective to bring India alongside the West, the Western democratic nations. And yet this whole issue of human rights abuses, this whole issue of just the neglect of the normal rule of law is just brushed under the carpet with a 20-second meaningless response of rhetoric. And it's, of course, they have to keep a lot of these discussions behind the scenes. And we always only judge by results. But the results all the way along always point to one direction, that human rights are being brushed under the carpet in the name of trade deals. That's all that's happening. And we know exactly what's going to happen is that the UK will sign a trade deal with India eventually. And nothing will be done about the human rights record. Yeah, we'll make some rhetoric again that will apply some pressure. But Narendra Modi will be Narendra Modi. He'll just say, yeah, okay, I'll do something about it. But frankly, what are you going to do about it? And that's all that'll happen. I'll predict here and now that nothing will be done, and a trade deal will be signed, and the world will move on, and human rights abuses will continue. So. Very disappointing, but there you go. But all we can do.
So much more important for the public to speak out and keep this issue, on social media and everywhere else. Just keep the pressure on.
Exactly. It's up to people like us, people like our audience, to keep that pressure on, keep applying pressure to your MPs, your representatives, your political representatives, wherever you may be. The pressure has got to come from the people, because clearly the establishment are not interested, and they will only become interested when they have no choice but to be interested, and that can only come from the people on the ground. And I talk about the establishment, and my next story is all about joining some dots. And I often wonder, and we often ponder the ways of the world and how the world works behind the scenes. And it's very clear that there are a lot of dots that can be joined around the world that would explain an awful lot of political directions, a lot of international affairs, a lot of international geopolitics as well. We've talked a lot about Bangladesh and what's happened in Bangladesh over the last week or so, in fact, actually over the last couple of months, that eventually culminated in Hasina, the leader of 14, 15 years, fleeing the country, fleeing for her life. And again, it highlights this disparity, this disjoint, this gap between the people and the ruling elite that seems to span across east, across to the west. And even here, ironically, in the west, we almost have this disjoint between a ruling establishment and the people on the ground, as it is increasingly being highlighted. And in fact, is one of the reasons why there were so many riots on the streets here in the UK. But let's just take a look at Bangladesh in a little bit more detail and how it links to the UK. And this might start to explain, as we join some of the dots, might explain some reason why the Labour government, now that it has taken power and has essentially jumped into bed with the establishment, it might explain some of their changes in attitude since they took charge. So Bangladesh's Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, and I'll paraphrase an article that hit the headlines yesterday. Sheikh Hasina may give the impression of a harmless grandmother, but of course she's 76 years old, and she fled after her 15 years of iron rule. But this article, interestingly, refers to her as a ruthless tyrant, and of course this is something that has been highlighted on a regular occasion. Troublesome political opponents or journalists critical of her regime were put under surveillance, harassed or arrested on trumped-up charges. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Serial offenders might be abducted from their homes, never to be seen again. Human rights groups estimate there were at least 600 enforced disappearances on Hasina's watch. Again, doesn't that sound familiar? Hundreds more were the victims of extrajudicial killings, yet again familiar, and 280 died at the hands of the security forces in the last few weeks alone, as popular feeling against her rule reached fever pitch and the government responded with its trademark brutality. And once again, how familiar? Anti-government protesters were shot at with live ammunition. Police also used tear gas, rubber bullets and stun grenades. And I once again have to say, how familiar? So Hasina then fled Bangladesh by military plane to India. And there are reports now coming out that she is seeking asylum here in the UK. Interesting. Why the UK? This far-right extremist leader who was responsible for extrajudicial killings, who's responsible for imprisoning her political opponents. Why would the UK of all countries, this beacon of democracy, why would they harbour somebody like this? That is a very good question. Well, her trump card is likely to be her extensive family links in Britain. Get this. Most notably, her beloved niece, Labour's Treasury Minister, Tulip Siddiq. So the Treasury Minister of the government is Hasina's niece. How interesting. And she's said to treat Ms. Siddiq like a daughter and appears to have been a major influence on her blossoming political career. Now, Ms. Siddiq told a Bengali-speaking journalist, "I learnt everything about politics from my auntie." And of course, Hasina watched proudly from the British Parliament's gallery as her prodigy, her niece, made her maiden speech when she became an MP. And video footage from UK meetings of Hasina's ruling party, the Awami League, twice show Tulip Siddiq thanking them for helping her get elected as an MP. This is the Awami League, Hasina's own political party in Bangladesh, helped Ms. Tulip Siddiq become an MP here in the UK. But of course, there's been a lot less transparency over these connections over Ms. Siddiq's political campaigning when she became an MP. And this is looking rather awkward, considering that she's described herself as a strong socialist. You know, representing the working class, representing the normal people, she claims, and has a history of publicly supporting human rights and social justice causes. Wow! So Tulip Siddiq has built her parliamentary career on allegedly supporting human rights and social justice causes. And such condemnation for Hasina's repressive regime has actually been rather lacking from Tulip Siddiq. Surprise, surprise. And when she has been questioned about this, she has insisted that she has no capability nor desire to influence politics in Bangladesh. Well, why would she when her aunt is in charge? And but of course she had no
politics for her favour, right?
Absolutely. This is politics at work. I talk about joining the dots. Can you start to see the dots being joined here? So she had no problem, of course, condemning Israel. She's had no problems condemning Iran over one of her constituents. But the truth is, Tulip Siddiq is from Bangladeshi political aristocracy. Her grandpa was Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who was the founding father of the nation and its first president. She was even photographed alongside her aunt, Hasina, and mother at the Kremlin with Vladimir Putin. Now, the Conservatives have accused her of trying to cover up and bury these links to Putin and Sheikh Hasina, these leaders of democratic nations. They try to claim themselves, and claim that she's deleted posts and photographs on a blog which showed how she campaigned to get her aunt, Sheikh Hasina, re-elected, including one where she described herself as a spokesperson for the Awami League. But it does appear that Bangladeshi politics have had some sway, and I think that's an understatement, in her own political career here in the UK. She's been filmed several times thanking the Awami League for their support in helping her getting elected as an MP. And in the elections that we had in 2019, the UK wing of Sheikh Hasina's party, the Awami League, claimed that they were giving Siddiq's campaign guidance and direction. So, we often wonder, what on earth is going on? Why on earth, firstly, would the UK grant asylum to Sheikh Hasina, this person who's been driven out of her own country by her own people because of things like extrajudicial killings, her oppression, her deep oppression of human rights, and all these parallels that I drew with Modi and India's regime over decades against their religious minorities, and particularly against the Sikh community. Don't you see some parallels here? Bangladesh's totalitarian, effectively, leadership imprisoning their political enemies. Their trumped-up charges against Yunus, who was charged, who faced 100 criminal charges and was then sentenced to jail, essentially for being a political opponent of Sheikh Hasina. And of course, Narendra Modi has been accused of the very same thing, Rahul Gandhi, etc. So the parallels between Modi's regime and Hasina's regime are not difficult to find. And yet, the UK now offering asylum potentially to Hasina. And it turns out Hasina's own niece, as supported by the Awami League, this political party, this extremist, effectively extremist party in Bangladesh, has propped up and promoted and succeeded in getting effectively one of their own as an MP of the current British government. And we have David Lammy now refusing to take on Narendra Modi, but instead become all very friendly with Narendra Modi. And again, these links are now starting to appear, these establishment links. We've talked about the establishment, the ruling establishments of all these countries. It's all starting to fall into place. There are parallels between the BJP, the RSS, Modi, between the Awami League, between the British establishment. And what is concerning here, and people need to wake up to this fact, we talk about the right and the left, but in fact, These extremists, these people who want total control in whichever country they live in, and we've talked about India on a regular basis, but it's here in the UK, it's all over the world, it is in banana republics in Africa. They pose as whatever vehicle that they need to pose as to take control. It could be, and very often they pose as socialists. Here in the UK we have Keir Starmer, head of the Labour Party, the supposed socialist party representing the common man, the working class of Great Britain, supposedly representing the religious minorities of Great Britain. And yet, what have we seen in recent weeks? We've seen a draconian clampdown. Now, in the name of clamping down on right-wing protesters, yet we saw Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, goading and provoking the right wing, basically saying, I dare you to take the streets. We have Elon Musk doing the same thing. Saying, go on, this is what's happening in the UK, take to the streets, you know, you're turning into the Soviet Union. Yes, absolutely, they're posing as socialists, and yet we demonise the right wing. And the right wing, absolutely, essentially, and we've talked about this in the past, the political circle, where we have the centre ground, we have the right wing and we have the left wing. But you take both wings to an extreme and they meet up full circle at the top in extremists. Their extremist wings meet up in fascism, totalitarian control. This is what we have to watch out for. So when we support the left or the right, they all in the extremes become full circle. And don't you find it fascinating that when we come full circle, that these regimes, these totalitarian regimes, as they move closer and closer to totalitarianism, they all meet in the middle, whether it's the far right, the far left. And here, they all work together. They work together across the globe. And here we see Hasina seeking asylum in the UK, a Labour government that was supposedly is a socialist working class looking after the man in the street or the woman in the street's best interest. Now they're in the government. Now they are the establishment or a wing of the establishment. Look what's happening. They're all joining up together. So draw whatever conclusions you may from this. I've drawn my conclusions, and it's very clear that we talked about a disjoint between the people and the ruling elites across the world. Well, here is yet another little piece of that jigsaw falling into place. The only way things like this change, the only way that these regimes can change is through people power. It is by all of us recognising it for what it is. It is by all of us pressuring back up that ladder, pressuring up the chain, up the political chain. It's got to come from the numerous, the people on the ground. We outnumber them by a very large percentage. It's like the Dalits. We talked about the caste system, how India keeps control in India, how the Indian regime, the upper caste keep control of that massive pyramid where there are hundreds of millions at the base of the pyramid and only a tiny percentage at the top of the pyramid. They control that pyramid through all this methodology, James. It's a very tangled web, is it not?
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think it's anything, I don't think it's just coincidence that she went through India to escape her country and to lean on their powers that be to get her the assistance and clearance to go as a transit point to the UK through India. I think that was very calculated. And I think that there's also going to be more involvement between the two leaders in the future. So.
Yeah, I mean, I say join the dots. You can draw almost a straight line between Dakar and New Delhi and London. And what does that mean? Well, draw your own conclusions. We're being a little conspiratorial about it, but certainly there's something going on there. Okay, let's move on to a couple of quick ones. In Canada, James, apparently Sikh groups in Canada are again demonstrating outside the Surrey, British Columbia Provincial Court for the latest trial hearing against India's assassins of the Shaheed, the martyr Bhai Hardeep Singh Nijjar. And of course, the demonstrations reflect the global importance of this transnational repression case and its meaning to Sikhs worldwide. So it's very encouraging, James, to see the Sikh community in Canada are still very, very vocal, still very active, still very motivated to highlight to the world this transnational repression.
Absolutely. And none of the defendants last week did appear in court. Their lawyers were there instead. The defendants, the four accused, are still locked up in custody. Once again, they didn't appear in court. Right now, the Crown, which is our prosecution service, just like in the UK, but in the US they call it a prosecutor and such, Regardless, though, they have over 10,000 documents that's being reviewed by both sides, with another expected 10,000 plus more documents that need to be reviewed. So it's going to be a very lengthy trial. It's going to take time, but it's great to see that the Sikh community is going to be there every step of the way. The next appearance is scheduled for October, and we'll see where things land there. And something in addition to that is that there has to be a very delicate line walked, because we do have timeline restrictions in Canada in order to guarantee a speedy trial and to make sure it happens within a reasonable time period, or the case can be taken and thrown out and charges dismissed. So it's a delicate balance of making sure that it is done appropriately, that it's done to the letter of the law, that it is done with due process, but also to make sure that it's done within a timely fashion. So we'll just keep an eye on that.
Yeah, and may I contrast that, very interestingly, with India and the case of Jagtar Singh Johal. And I'm going to bring this up because this is very relevant to what I was talking about earlier. Certainly. Is that Jaggi, once again, a few days ago, he had his 130th trial hearing. 130th. 2 senior police officers failed yet again to appear via video link for his... Jaggi appeared via video link, but 2 senior police officers who were supposed to give evidence failed to attend and to produce case property, despite the fact that they were the ones who previously asked the matter to be adjourned to today. So they didn't turn up last time, so they asked for an adjournment, and they've not turned up again at the adjourned date, the postponed date. So, without any proceedings, the hearing has been adjourned to the 17th of August. So, yeah, James, I have to contrast. This is how Indian or law, that's the wrong word. This is how process happens in India. This isn't any rule of law. This is a joke. This is disgusting. Yeah, this isn't justice. Justice is what, James, what you've been talking about in Canada. That's how justice proceeds. This is political totalitarianism. This is it's disgusting, as we said. Okay, let's move.
Stretch that our system is perfect. I'm just saying that there are certain expectations and legalities of it.
Yeah, our systems are not perfect, James, but they are accountable. That's the difference. That's the difference. India's system has no accountability. 130th trial hearing. I mean, it's just, I laugh in just disgust that India, and we talk about our politicians. Why are our politicians not calling this out? Why is David Lammy not calling this out? That's anyway. Right, let's rush on to my final story. And a quick one, we talked about anti-Sikh hate crimes, and there are some great initiatives underway now, particularly in the US, to report anti-Sikh hate crimes. And we talked about the story last week about the Sikh taxi driver, Rapanjit Singh, who fell foul of the New York and New Jersey Port Authority police because he was wearing his kirpan. Now, the World Sikh Organisation of Canada have launched an anti-Sikh hate form that is available through their website. And this allows Sikhs to report any crimes, but also, in the same token, applies pressure on those responsible and those who can change things. So the Sikh coalition joined the New York and New Jersey Sangats in calling for an end to anti-Sikh discrimination by the Port Authority. And they've put together on their website a form that people can fill in and send off to the Inspector General of the Port Authority. And I'll paraphrase quickly what is contained within this message. And it says, as a member of the Sikh community in the area, I'm writing to urge that the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey take immediate and significant steps to end any and all discriminatory treatment against Sikh individuals, including specifically Sikh taxi drivers. And of course, it then refers to Rapanjit Singh's situation last week when he was wearing his kirpan. Now, charges against him have still not been dropped. Moreover, Mr. Singh's case is the latest example of this discriminatory treatment. It's not the first time that this has happened, and another Sikh driver was similarly harassed within the last 4 months. So, of course, this has happened before. And, of course, it then refers to the kirpan and explains that the kirpan is an article of faith in Sikhism, the world's 5th largest organised religion. It is absolutely legal to carry a kirpan. I referred last week, of course, to the case of the people against Singh in 1987, where the legal precedent was set that it is legal to carry a kirpan as an article of faith. Sikhs have been mistakenly arrested and charged under anti-weapons statutes for carrying kirpans, but those charges have been consistently dropped by prosecutors or dismissed by judges, primarily because of that case. Because of the kirpan's status as an article of faith and Sikhs' peaceful intent in wearing them. It is not designed as a weapon to be used in any criminal situation. Sikh taxi and rideshare drivers have suffered violent hate crimes on the basis of their turbans, religiously maintained articles of faith, including unshorn beards, and or other aspects of their identity, including skin colour, the language, national origin, and more. Basically, run-of-the-mill, old-fashioned racism. We urge you to issue a statement denouncing anti-Sikh discrimination, update any policies related to accommodation for articles of faith so that Sikhs and Kirpans are better protected, and move to ensure that all personnel under your leadership receive adequate educational training regarding the beliefs and practices of Sikhs. So a very clear message to the leadership, and of course this should be sent to all law enforcement agencies, that they need educating. I don't think there was any malintent here. I don't think there was any deliberate intention of racism here. It was just the police who were uneducated, who were clearly unaware of the religious significance of a kirpan. But unfortunately, this keeps happening. It keeps happening all over the world, as it turns out. We'll talk about this in the comments shortly. But unfortunately, Mr. Singh was the victim of this uneducated mistake. This basically, it turned out that it could be interpreted as racism. Unfortunately, it's not racism in the malicious sense. It was simple discrimination, I think, by uneducated police officers. And this message is a very diplomatic message to explain to the port authorities. You must educate all your officers that how important the kirpan is to Sikhs. And how important it is as a religious part of Sikhism, and that everybody should be educated and not discriminate against this very simple article of faith, James. So it's a great initiative. Let's hope more Sikhs take this up and apply the pressure where it is needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, in the US, I mean, we know that Sikhism is very large worldwide, but in the US, it ranks around 8th or 9th within the top religions in the country. The actual count of Sikhs in the US varies greatly from organization and different controls or counts, anywhere between, 250,000 to over 1.3 million. So, of course, it is a large constituency of the community in many areas, and it's important for all law enforcement, whether you're in small rural towns in Kentucky or whether you're in big metropolis areas like New York and New Jersey, to understand the impact that their actions are having by not at least having the basic ideas and respect for these religions. And again, I don't believe that it was malicious intent there. I think that it was just a failure of learning about the different religions of people that they are representing and trying to help keep safe. So.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the more that these cases are highlighted by people like us, and hopefully more mainstream media pick up on these cases, the more that people realise in law enforcement this whole situation, they start respecting elements like the kirpan. So, okay, let's move on to our comments section. And as always, comments have been pouring in, some wonderful comments, lots and lots of really interesting, educational, and sometimes often funny comments, and sometimes very provocative comments, which are always very entertaining to read and to follow up. So, last week we reported on various things. Now, I have been held up and corrected, thank you to two commenters who pointed out about Dr. Amarjit Singh. Now, Surjit Kaur and Azad Singh both pointed out. Surjit said, Dr. Amarjit Singh is pure Khalistani. He do Sacho Sach programme, excuse my pronunciation, I don't know if that's correct, on TV84. And Azad Singh pointed out, Angus, you misread Cruella's comment. Yes, of course, Cruella, one of our regular commenters, mentioned about Dr. Amarjit Singh, and I jumped in and assumed that Dr. Amarjit Singh was in fact a plant by the RSS. In fact, no, quite the opposite. Dr. Dr. Amarjit Singh is in fact a Khalistani who runs a programme called Sache Sach on TV84. What Cruella meant was that Dr. Amarjit Singh often calls out the RSS Sikhs and other pro-Hindutva Sikhs as renter Sikhs. So thank you for correcting me on that. Of course, that story all related to one of our other commenters, Guvi Yul, who actually, if I'm correct, if I recall correctly, actually pointed out that there are many Sikhs who are supporters of the RSS and who publicly stand up and say, no, we support the RSS. And many Sikhs, well, I say genuine Sikhs, I'm not in a place to call them genuine Sikhs, but certainly many Sikhs call out the fact, including Dr. Amarjit Singh, that they are renter Sikhs, they are agents for the other side who are deliberately put in place to try and persuade other Sikhs to switch sides effectively. So thank you for correcting me on that one. I have learned something. And I must look up Dr. Amarjit Singh.
Apologies to for any misunderstanding or any offence. So none meant
Indeed,
by
yeah.
any stretch.
As we said last week, James, we're just a clumsy pair of white people bungling through and learning on a steep learning curve. So thank you for educating us once again. I don't know actually if
patience of their own.
And I don't know if Dr. Amarjit Singh broadcasts. I suspect he broadcasts in Punjabi, so maybe it's not something that we'll be able to have a look at. But we'll take a look anyway. Thank you. Right, A. Singh says, thank you, Angus and James, for accurate reporting at a time where there is so much misinformation that clouds judgment. Oh boy, how true this comment is, and how true that there is so much misinformation. We do try, do we not, James, to point out how much misinformation, how deeply dangerous misinformation is, how easy it is to spread misinformation. And it's up to us, James, is it not, with our little voice to point it out.
Absolutely, and like the last comments there, if we get something wrong, we're men enough to admit that we were wrong and to correct it on air. So don't be shy about pointing out if we get something wrong. Let us know and let us correct it.
Exactly that. We rely on our audience to such a large extent to help get the truth out there, help the message get out there. Because it's very easy for powerful Hindutva armies of bots and these farms somewhere in India that are churning out anti-Sikh propaganda, pro-Modi, pro-RSS propaganda right across the whole of social media, the anti-Islamic propaganda that spews on a daily basis. There is a huge amount of really terrible propaganda that we've reported on. We need you, our wonderful audience, to comment and tell us, point out when you see misinformation. Let us know about this stuff so that we can spread that message out. So yes, thank you. And Gaviyul, yes, thank you for this little comment. I wanted to point this out. Gaviyul says, another amazing programme, liked and commented for the algorithms. Yes, thank you very much for that. One of our regular commenters, and often takes a slightly contrarian view, but always very well supported with reasoned arguments, very intelligently argued comments. So thank you for all your contributions so far. But also, and I wanted to highlight this one, because yes, each and every one of you that comments, and thank you for watching us. Everybody who watches us really helps us. Obviously, it boosts our viewing numbers, which helps get us up the rankings in terms of spreading our message. But particularly, if you like and you make a comment, even however small, even if it's just one of the hi, good mornings, or love your show, whatever it is, or even we hate your show, it doesn't matter. But thank you. All it does, as this commenter has highlighted, it helps the YouTube algorithm. It's weird magic that it works, and nobody really knows how it does work, other than the more that you comment, the more that you like, and of course the more that you watch. It does help the program spread its reach. It gets pushed higher up the rankings in YouTube. So yes, please do, even if it's just a small comment, whatever it is, even if it's just to say hi. We do appreciate that, but it does help the show and help the channel. So thank you for that.
And on that note, we would love to see you sending in some photos and videos of Sikh issues, Sikh culture, whatever. We want you to share with us and be a part of the show. So the comments are great, but also feel free to add video and photos. We'd love to see them.
Of course, they call it user-generated content, and we have as much user-generated stuff on our show as much as possible in terms of our comments. because firstly, it's actually very interesting for you guys to hear our feedback, I hope. It's also very interesting, certainly interesting for us to get your feedback. And it gives us lots of talking points. It also, as we said before, it raises so many issues that we might not have considered, or we've got wrong, or we've misinterpreted, or we need to cover, or misinformation, etc., etc. So yeah, it's
people have the same questions, but too shy to put the comments or the questions up on the screen.
Indeed.
So you're asking for a whole group, not just yourself. So we appreciate it.
Exactly that. If you're too, if for whatever reason you don't want to make a public comment, send us an email, as several of you have done. Several of you sent really wonderful, very nice emails, very supportive but very interesting emails, highlighting all sorts of news items. And I just comment on that. Sometimes links that we received have been in Punjabi. Unfortunately, as we said before, James and I don't speak Punjabi, and we don't have the resources. The team on the Punjabi side are too busy producing their own show to translate for us. So please, if you do send us links, try, if possible, either give us an idea of what that Punjabi story is about, so at least we can then do a bit more research around it in English, or translate it, or otherwise just send us links to English material that we can obviously report on. So thank you anyway for everybody who has sent us really, really interesting links. We have covered stories on that basis. Now, Amrit Singh. I like good news, don't we all? Specifically about Khalistan, don't we all? Hopefully, you will be the first channel to say Khalistan is here. Khalistan's in Zindabad. Now, James, here, I give you our word as best we can. If Khalistan is a reality, and God willing, that James and I are still around to witness that wonderful day, I give you my word that, if life allows it, James and I will broadcast from the capital of Khalistan the day that Khalistan's day of establishment happens. James and I will be there in person, God willing, when that happens. I give you our word on that.
Angus.
So all we need is you out there, our audience, to make it happen. We will do our bit, you do your bit, and if it does happen, we will broadcast a live show from the capital of Khalistan. What a day, what a glorious day that will be. And behind us will be the backdrop. We will have the Khalistan flag behind us as a backdrop. So we look forward to that day. Now, S. Simba. I think I could almost have predicted that S. Simba would have jumped in. Couldn't resist it, of course. It's already here in Canada, but you have to find it. It's too small. Our resident provocateur just couldn't resist having a little poke and a prod. And Gurpreet Kaur responds, it's not just in Canada, it's all over the place. It's everywhere. It's where Khalistanis are. And maybe you need to take your Indian media fake propaganda glasses off to see it. So a very firm response to a very standard argument from S. Simba. Say, well, if you want Khalistan, have it in Canada, James. Why not? We talked about that before, haven't we?
We do have the largest Sikh population outside of India, so I'll give them that. And what a great community it is. So.
But I'm pretty confident in predicting that if the Punjab does have a referendum, and I know Khalistan would win that referendum, that a large part of the Sikh diaspora would relocate back to the Punjab, back to Khalistan. I'm very presumptuous in guessing that. In fact, I'd ask our commenters who are not in the Punjab, who are in the diaspora, if Khalistan, not if, when Khalistan becomes a reality, would you relocate back to Khalistan? I'm very curious to know what our audience think about that. Let us know. Either email us, send us a comment. Would you relocate to Khalistan when Khalistan becomes a reality? Let us know. Okay, Combat X says the real problem are world leaders. They fail the people. Every country needs to hold their leaders and their opposition accountable. Yeah, in a very simple sentence, this highlights a real problem, actually, that I think the world has, and I think this even accounts to democratic nations to some degree, that leaders, world leaders, are failing us on a regular basis, even here in the West. And I've called out the Conservative government who failed us deeply for 14 years. And I'm now calling out the Labour government, now that they're in power, now that they are part of the establishment, they are failing us. James, I think you've got a slightly lesser case with Trudeau. At least he is standing up for the Sikhs, is he not?
He is, but, people love to hate politicians, not only here in Canada, but everywhere. So, but no, he definitely is a proud supporter of the Sikh community and the freedoms and rights that come with being Canadian or on Canadian soil, and that come with democracy that should be respected in India as well.
Yeah, we could talk for hours about this, but I think, yeah, it's interesting that, of course, we've talked about Bangladesh, where clearly the people were failed significantly by their leader. In India, the people are being failed, particularly the minorities are being failed on a regular basis by their leader. But like I said, here in the West, even though we claim ourselves as democracies, there is still a failure that even this accountability, that at least we have elections every 4 or 5 years, but even with that ability to pull down a government, they just get replaced by another government who frankly don't seem to change things. It's all about the ruling elite. They just keep their place people in place. And it doesn't matter who you vote for. I'll quote one of our other political leaders who said that in the UK, Labour and government are two sides of the same, two buttocks of the same backside, which is absolutely true. So I'll leave that point there, and we'll move on to our final set of comments. Amrik Singh says, I've lots of stories for Sikhs at the airport. Now, of course, talking about the Kirpans story. And Amrik also then says, I've seen similar issues at Heathrow in London, the big airport in London. I've seen similar issues at Heathrow as Sikh chaplain regarding Kirpan. You just have to educate people who work at the airport. Now, my question to you, Amrik, is are you saying here, I don't know if I've interpreted this correctly, but it sounds like you are the Sikh chaplain at Heathrow Airport. If you are, I am genuinely fascinated. You've lots of stories for Sikhs at the airport. Let us know. Again, if you don't want to put it in the public comments, send us an email, please. Send us an email with your insight, what you have seen, what you've witnessed, because again, it's a very important story, this. It's a very relevant story, and it's very interesting that you yourself, if indeed you work at Heathrow, let us know what you've seen. You are on that front line. So clearly you've seen this same issue here in the UK. It's not just obviously in New York, it's happening the world over, unsurprisingly. So do let us know on that one.
Yeah, and how it's been dealt with and educated the staff at Heathrow as well. We'd love to know what solutions were brought forward and what works.
Yeah, and I'm surprised actually, because I know certainly here in the UK that Heathrow has a huge amount of people from every faith and every background, every nationality. And I would have assumed, and again, assume is a big word, a big assumption itself. I would have assumed that they would have been very educated about religious sensibilities, and if they are failing, that's a surprising failure. So I'm very interested to know what stories you've got to report. And again, user something or other says, Amrit Shari Sikhs wear 24/7 their Kirpal, the 5Ks. American government and law personnel should know that. Absolutely they should. The 5Ks are such a well-known thing amongst so many societies now, that why aren't law enforcement better educated about this? So thank you for highlighting that. And then the final comment, Gurpreet Kaur says, thanks for the great show. Well, thank you for your comments. And I would like to mention, even in some parts of the US and Canada, just simply wearing a turban brings challenges, as people often mix up Sikhs with the Taliban. And it's not just the Americas. Here in the UK, as I know, members of our Sikh audience have reported themselves that very often, and of course we talked about the riots here in the UK, where rampaging mobs of racist lunatics have potentially, and I haven't seen any reports yet of attacking Sikhs, but we do know that the racist far right very often confuse anybody basically who's not white, as they just assume it's their Taliban. And it's very easy. If you're a far right thug and you're blinkered, if you see anybody who's non-white, well, it's one of them, isn't it? Whoever one of them is, and it's a blanket term to refer to an Islamist, to a Sikh, to whatever it happens to be. And here's an interesting parallel here: the first victim of racist crime after 9/11 was a Sikh. He was, I can't remember the actual details of it, but it was actually a Sikh who was attacked after 9/11. So again, the anger, the backlash against Islamic extremism occurred. And the first victim of that was in the Sikh. It was somebody who assumed they were a Muslim. Of course they weren't. Right. So unfortunately, that is a sad outcome of this, is it not, James?
It certainly is, and we see it that ignorance begets ignorance, and that's one of our goals again, Angus, is to educate people and bring awareness to the ignorant.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I will
try to reduce racism. So.
Yeah, and an interesting side issue, and we've got to wrap the show up because we're running out of time now, but I will talk about, hopefully in the next few days, I've got a very quick story about our far right, and interestingly, I don't know how to interpret this, but Tommy Robinson, who is a vilified figure of the far right, even he recognises the Sikhs for being the great patriotic British. I'm trying to think of the right words here. Again, I've got to choose my words very carefully. But even Tommy Robinson of the far right separated the Sikhs out and said, no, they are a great part of British society, which I think, and I don't even know how good that is an endorsement coming from somebody like Tommy Robinson. But it does actually show that the Sikhs, I think what it does, the message from that is how the Sikhs, the British Sikhs, have differentiated themselves as being the most incredible part of British society, how they have contributed so much that even the far right recognise what a great part of British society that they have become. Again, we'll cover that in a separate story, and it's just a weird quirk of whatever. I can't even choose the right words to describe it. It's just so weird. But anyway, but actually, James, we must wrap up because we are massively over time. Unfortunately, we do have to close the show there. But you have been watching Perspectives. Please don't forget to keep those comments coming in. We have been enjoying reading them. We have been enjoying responding to them as always. And we would love to cover more of your great comments. So keep those coming in. And don't forget, as I do mention, you can email us directly at message@satellitetv.com on anything that you'd like to highlight with us. But you have been watching Perspectives. It is a big goodbye from me, and it is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.